Jessica had always prided herself on being a patient person. She had grown accustomed to Derek's late nights, his excuses about work dinners, and the occasional text message that he'd brush off as nothing important. But tonight, something felt different. Her instincts, the ones she had pushed to the back of her mind for months, were screaming at her. Something's wrong. Tonight, something is going to happen. She stood outside the restaurant, trying to keep her breathing steady. The glow from the dimly lit sign flickered above her. The place wasn't fancy, but it was enough to be a little out of the way, perfect for a quiet dinner. At least, that's what she thought when Derek had told her he was meeting a client here earlier in the day. But as soon as she stepped into the dim hallway, she felt a tight knot form in her stomach. She wasn't even sure why she had come. Part of her wanted to turn around and leave. Maybe it was just her growing paranoia, the little doubts that had accumulated over the past few months. But another part of her told her to stay. To see. What's going on, Derek? As she passed the main dining room, the soft hum of conversation filled the air. She wasn't sure what exactly she expected to find, but the last thing she ever thought would happen was this: Derek, laughing, sitting across from a woman she didn't recognize. A beautiful woman, far too young and confident to be one of his colleagues. The two of them were sharing a bottle of wine, their heads close together. Derek's hand rested on the table, so close to hers that Jessica could almost feel the electricity between them. She stopped in her tracks, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. The restaurant seemed to shrink around her as her mind went blank for a moment. She could feel her knees go weak, but she steadied herself, gripping the wall for support. The woman's laugh echoed in Jessica's ears, each note like a blade slicing through the fragile shell of her trust. Jessica's first instinct was to storm over there, to confront him. She imagined the scene in her head, walking up to the table, Derek's eyes wide with shock, his mistress looking guilty as hell. Jessica could almost hear the words in her head. What the hell is this, Derek? But something stopped her. Instead of rushing in, she found herself frozen in place. Her legs felt like lead, her breath shallow as she kept her distance. She wanted to scream, but she couldn't find her voice. She just stood there, hidden in the shadows, watching them. Her husband, the man she had married just 5 years ago, sitting with another woman, completely unaware that she was standing right there. Jessica felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away. No, this wasn't about her weakness. It wasn't about the tears. This was about something bigger, something that felt like the final piece of a puzzle she had been piecing together for months. The late nights, the vague excuses, the strange messages that disappeared too quickly, the feeling that she was losing him. It was all true. He's been seeing her for a while, hasn't he? Her mind raced with questions. Was this a one-time thing? Was it something more? How long had this been going on behind her back? 1,000 scenarios ran through her mind, each one more painful than the last. But still, she stood there, watching as if frozen by the reality of the situation. She felt her chest tighten, and the air around her grew heavier with every passing second. What do I do now? She considered walking away, leaving, not confronting him tonight. Maybe she could just slip out of the restaurant and pretend like she never saw this. She could drive home, tell herself it was nothing, that it didn't matter. But deep down, she knew she wasn't going to walk away. Not this time. Instead, she made a decision. She wouldn't rush in. She wouldn't act out of anger. If Derek was going to do this, if he was going to betray her like this, she would make sure he knew. But on her terms. A part of her wanted to go right over there and create a scene, to expose him in front of everyone. But another part of her, some quieter part of her, wanted to watch. To see how long he could keep pretending, how long he could stay in this lie before the truth broke through. She wasn't ready to give him the satisfaction of knowing she'd caught him just yet. Not until she was ready to strike. With a deep breath, Jessica wiped her face and took another step back. She could still see them through the frosted glass, laughing as if nothing was wrong. But everything was wrong. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stood there, hidden in the dark, a spectator to her own heartbreak. Suddenly, Derek turned his head. He wasn't looking in her direction yet, but his gaze moved slowly across the room. Jessica's pulse quickened. She barely had time to react before his eyes locked onto hers. For a split second, time stood still. His face dropped, and he froze, caught in the act. Jessica saw it all in his eyes, the shock, the guilt, the realization that he had been caught. His body tensed, his hand faltering just above the table. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The woman across from him looked up, confused. Jessica could see the flicker of uncertainty in Derek's eyes, as if he wasn't sure how to explain the situation. But the moment had already passed. It was too late for him to pretend. She stood still, waiting. For a long moment, she just watched. She wasn't angry. Not yet. She wasn't even sad. What she felt in that moment was something much stronger, clarity. It wasn't about confronting Derek right now, not in front of everyone. It was about knowing that she had seen the truth, and the truth would be his undoing. And so, she turned on her heel, walking away without another glance. The sound of her heels clicking on the floor was the only thing that broke the silence. He's going to regret this, she thought, as she made her way out of the restaurant. But not yet. Not until I'm ready. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Jessica's life before Derek had been a whirlwind of uncertainty and dreams. Raised in a small town in Ohio, she never had the luxury of knowing what it felt like to be completely secure. Her father had left when she was just 5, leaving her mother to raise her and her younger brother alone. The memories of her childhood were a mix of love, pain, and hard work. Her mother worked 2 jobs, barely making ends meet, while Jessica learned early on that she had to be independent to survive. Even though her childhood had been difficult, Jessica always held on to the idea of love, real love. The kind that would make everything worth it. She clung to that idea, building her own version of what a perfect family would be when she got older. It was a dream she held close, one that would shape her relationships and decisions for years to come. At 18, Jessica left her small town for college in Chicago. There, she met Derek. He was charming, confident, and had an air of sophistication that intrigued her. He was everything she had ever wanted in a partner, successful, driven, and kind. At least that's what she thought in the beginning. He was older than her, and at first, Jessica thought that maybe she wasn't quite on his level. He had a way of making her feel special, making her feel seen in a way she had never felt before. Their relationship started like a dream. Late-night study sessions turned into long walks under the stars, and soon, they were inseparable. Derek had a gentle side, one that balanced out his ambition. It was easy to believe in the fairy tale they were building together. By the time they graduated, Jessica knew he was the one. They moved in together, and within a year, Derek proposed. She said yes without a second thought. She never questioned it, never imagined anything could go wrong. Marriage came quickly after the engagement, and in the beginning, everything felt just as perfect as it had during their courtship. Derek landed a high-paying job at a prestigious law firm, and Jessica, a successful marketing consultant, found her own place in the world. They had a comfortable life, luxurious dinners, vacations to exotic places, and a beautiful home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. On the outside, everything was perfect. They were the couple everyone envied. But underneath the surface, cracks started to form. Derek's long hours at work grew longer. The late nights that had once been about talking over dinner had become phone calls with clients or meetings that stretched late into the night. Jessica, once the center of his world, began to feel like an afterthought. She kept herself busy with her career and tried to tell herself it was just a phase, that it was normal for ambitious people to be consumed by their work. Then came the small signs. At first, they were subtle. Derek would be distracted during their conversations, glancing at his phone more often than not. He became short with her, impatient with her questions about his day. But every time Jessica brought it up, he would reassure her with a smile, telling her she was overthinking. "You're just imagining things, Jess," he'd say, brushing off her concerns with a laugh. But deep down, Jessica knew something was wrong. She had grown up learning how to read people, how to listen to the silence between the words. She had seen it in her mother's relationships, the way things would start off wonderful and then slowly unravel. She had seen it in the lives of friends whose marriages ended with betrayal. The signs were there, even if she didn't want to admit it. She was terrified that she had married someone who would hurt her the way her father had hurt her mother. And then came the moment that shattered her world, the night she saw Derek's phone buzzing with an unfamiliar name. It wasn't a work contact, and it wasn't a friend. The message was just a string of emojis, but something in her gut told her it was more than that. She tried to push it away. She wanted to trust Derek. She really did. But that night, something inside her snapped. The doubt had crept in, and she couldn't shake it. The next few weeks were a blur. Jessica found herself questioning everything, every smile, every gesture, every conversation. She had never felt more alone in her marriage, even with Derek sitting across from her at the dinner table. She tried to talk to him about it, but Derek's charm always seemed to smooth things over. "You're just stressed," he'd say, his hand resting gently on hers. "We've been through worse, Jess. Trust me, we're fine." But no matter how many times Derek reassured her, something inside Jessica told her they weren't fine. The messages on his phone grew more frequent, the late-night calls became more secretive, and the distance between them only grew wider. She knew what she had to do, but it took everything inside her to actually follow through. And so, she started to prepare. She knew her marriage was on the brink of something ugly, but she refused to ignore it any longer. She began to trust her instincts again, the instincts that had kept her alive in a world that had never been kind to her. And it was those instincts that led her to the restaurant that night. The discovery was everything she feared and more. Derek, sitting across from a woman who wasn't his wife, laughing and sharing a moment that was meant to belong to them. The betrayal was so raw, so complete, that it took Jessica a moment to process it. But in that moment, standing in the shadows, watching Derek with someone else, she realized just how far they had fallen. She had been naive to think that everything was fine. She had been blinded by the fairy tale she'd built in her head, the fairy tale where Derek would never hurt her. But now, the truth was undeniable. He had chosen her, and in doing so, he had chosen to betray everything they had built together. As she stood there, her heart racing and her mind reeling, Jessica made a promise to herself. She wasn't going to confront him tonight. Not yet. She would wait. She would let him believe that nothing had changed, that she had no idea what he was doing. But when the time was right, when she was ready, she would make him see the truth. And so, she walked away from the restaurant that night, her body numb with shock, but her mind clearer than it had ever been. The woman she had once been, the patient, trusting wife, was gone. And in her place, a woman who had seen through the illusions and the lies had begun to emerge. The days following the confrontation were some of the most unsettling Jessica had ever experienced. She'd walked out of the restaurant that night with a sense of finality, her mind spinning with thoughts of Derek, the woman, and everything in between. Yet, the hardest part was not the discovery itself. It was what came after. The silence. The slow, suffocating distance that grew between her and Derek as the hours, days, and then weeks passed. Derek didn't confront her. At least, not directly. He did what he always did when things got uncomfortable. He pretended nothing had happened. The next morning, Jessica woke to find him already gone, a faint trace of his cologne lingering in the air. It was almost as if their lives had continued on autopilot, as if the dinner with his mistress hadn't happened. But it had, and the silence between them spoke louder than any words ever could. Jessica didn't know what to do. She couldn't just go on pretending, and yet she didn't know how to break the silence. Each day, she went through the motions, forcing herself to smile at the people around her, carrying on with work, but inside, she was a storm of emotions. Anger, sadness, confusion, they all mixed into a toxic cocktail that consumed her. What hurt the most was the fact that Derek hadn't even tried to apologize. Not a word. Not a glance that suggested he recognized the gravity of what had happened. Nothing. His behavior remained the same, detached, distracted, and distant. And yet, somehow, he still expected things to be normal. He'd come home late every night, claiming it was just another late-night meeting. He never mentioned the woman, and Jessica didn't know how to bring it up. Every time she tried to confront him, her voice faltered, and the words got stuck in her throat. The hurt was too raw, too deep, to articulate. It was as if she'd lost her ability to express how much he had hurt her, how completely his betrayal had shattered the foundation of their marriage. There were moments when Jessica would find herself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from her, wondering how long it would take for them to get back to where they had been, or if they ever could. On one such evening, she was alone at the table, picking at her food when Derek finally walked in. His face was tired, and his suit jacket hung loosely from his shoulders. He tossed his keys onto the counter and immediately walked toward the fridge, grabbing a beer. For a moment, Jessica considered speaking up. She wanted to ask him what was going on, what he'd been doing, why he hadn't even looked at her the way he used to. But the anger bubbled up in her chest before she could even open her mouth. "Have you been seeing her again?" she blurted out, her voice raw, almost breaking. Derek froze, the beer can suspended midair. For a split second, he looked like a deer caught in headlights, his eyes widening in shock. But he quickly regained his composure, setting the can down on the counter with a soft thud. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice almost too calm, too casual. "The woman from the restaurant. The one you were having dinner with. Don't play dumb with me, Derek." "I know what I saw." There was a long silence, the weight of Jessica's words hanging in the air. Derek's jaw tightened as he turned toward her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You're imagining things," he said flatly, his tone devoid of any real emotion. "There's nothing to talk about." Jessica stood up from the table, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. Her hands shook, but she couldn't stop herself from pushing forward. "No, Derek, I'm not imagining things," she said, her voice steadying with each word. "I saw you. I saw you with her. You can't lie to me anymore." Derek's face remained stoic, but there was a flicker of something, regret, maybe, that quickly disappeared. He reached for his beer again, as if nothing had changed, as if their entire world hadn't just shifted in a single moment. He took a long gulp, avoiding her eyes. "I'm not going to argue with you, Jessica. You're being ridiculous," he said, his voice tinged with annoyance now. "I don't know why you're making this a bigger deal than it is." Jessica stood frozen, staring at him, her heart racing. The anger that had been simmering within her for weeks finally boiled over. "No," she said, her voice stronger now. "You don't get to dismiss me like this. You don't get to pretend this isn't happening. You've been lying to me, Derek. And I won't let you do it anymore." His eyes finally met hers, and for the first time in a long while, Jessica saw something in his gaze. It wasn't the loving warmth she used to see when they first got together. It wasn't the spark of affection. It was something colder. A mixture of frustration and guilt that he couldn't hide any longer. "I'm not lying," Derek replied, his voice quieter now, almost too soft. "There's nothing between me and her." "I don't know what you saw, but you're jumping to conclusions." Jessica shook her head, feeling a sick knot twist in her stomach. She had been right. This was all she was going to get, a half-hearted attempt at denying the truth. It wasn't just the affair that hurt. It was the way Derek dismissed her feelings, how little he seemed to care that he had broken something that was once beautiful. "You know what, Derek," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. "I'm done with the lies. I don't care if you think I'm overreacting. I know what I saw. And I'm not going to pretend everything's fine anymore." Derek opened his mouth to respond, but the words never came. Instead, he let out a frustrated sigh, as if the whole conversation was beneath him. He turned away, grabbing his jacket from the back of the chair, preparing to leave again. "You know where I'll be," he muttered, his back now to her. Jessica watched him go, a mixture of fury and heartache churning in her chest. This wasn't a marriage anymore. This was a constant battle of pretending. And for the first time in years, she realized she couldn't keep pretending. The silence returned to the house once again. But this time, it wasn't just the quiet of an unresolved argument. It was the silence of an ending. Jessica stood still, her mind a whirlwind of confusion, betrayal, and regret. But she knew one thing: she couldn't go back. Not now. Not after everything. She would have to find a way to face the truth head-on, no matter how painful. Jessica couldn't shake the image of Derek and the woman from that night. It replayed in her mind like a broken record, each time more painful than the last. She'd spent days stewing in that anger, wondering what to do next. Each conversation with Derek only deepened her sense of betrayal, and every attempt at communication felt hollow. She knew that if she didn't do something soon, she would lose herself completely in this chaotic, suffocating silence. But Jessica was tired of being ignored, tired of the lies, tired of pretending everything was okay when it so clearly wasn't. It was time to confront this, to face the truth. She couldn't go on like this. One morning, after another sleepless night, Jessica decided she couldn't wait anymore. Her phone buzzed as she checked the time, 8:30 a.m. Derek had left early as usual, heading to work, but Jessica knew he wouldn't be there all day. She had an idea, something she had thought about doing, but had been too afraid to act on. Today, she would take the steps necessary to uncover the truth, once and for all. After getting ready, she grabbed her keys and left the house. The car ride was a blur. Her mind raced as she drove through the busy streets of the city. The familiar roads, once so comforting, now felt foreign. The destination she was headed for wasn't just a physical place, but a mental state, a place of clarity that she knew she could only reach by confronting what was hidden. She parked her car outside a small cafe that Derek had frequented often. It wasn't far from his office, just a few blocks away, and it had been his go-to spot for quick lunches or coffee breaks during the workday. Jessica had never thought much about it, but now it felt like the key to everything. If Derek had been seeing her, his mistress, it made sense that he'd take her somewhere discreet, somewhere familiar, somewhere he didn't have to worry about being caught. The cafe was busy that morning, the air filled with the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the hum of casual conversation. Jessica walked in, her steps steady, but her heart racing with every beat. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she had to see for herself. She had to know. She stood at the counter, pretending to look over the menu, her eyes darting across the room. A part of her wanted to turn around and leave, to pretend she wasn't even there. But she forced herself to stay, her gaze sweeping the tables until it landed on a familiar face. It was Derek, sitting in a corner booth, talking to someone. The woman. Jessica felt her stomach lurch. There was no mistaking it. She'd seen the woman's face in the background of Derek's texts, her profile popping up here and there whenever he'd leave his phone lying around. But seeing her in person was different. The woman was striking, tall, with dark hair and sharp features that were in stark contrast to Jessica's more approachable look. She was everything Jessica wasn't, and it was a cruel reminder of the world Derek had chosen over their own life together. Derek's laugh rang out, and the woman responded with a smile, leaning in closer to him. It was too intimate, too comfortable, and it hit Jessica like a punch to the gut. She wanted to shout, to run over and confront them, but something held her back. The weight of the situation hung over her, and for a moment, she couldn't move. She was paralyzed by the sight of it, by the fact that Derek, her husband, was here, sharing a moment with someone who wasn't her. She didn't know how long she stood there, just watching them, but eventually, Derek glanced up. His eyes locked with hers, and for the briefest of seconds, time seemed to stand still. Jessica could see the recognition in his face, the shock, the guilt, the realization that he'd been caught. For a moment, Jessica's heart stopped. She was frozen, unsure of what to do next. But then it happened. Derek stood up quickly, excusing himself from the woman, and walked toward Jessica. His face was pale, his posture stiff, and his eyes flickered nervously around the room as if searching for a way out. He didn't speak at first, just stood there in front of her, clearly unsure of how to handle the situation. Jessica, what are you doing here?" His voice was strained, almost pleading. Jessica didn't say anything at first. Instead, she took a deep breath, steadying herself. She couldn't afford to break down now, not in front of him, not in front of this woman who had been the cause of all this pain. "You're not even going to deny it?" she asked, her voice low but strong. Derek looked at her, his face flushed with embarrassment. "It's not what you think," he began, his voice stumbling over the words, trying to find an excuse. "I saw it, Derek," Jessica said, her voice cutting through his feeble attempts. "I saw everything. I saw you with her. And I don't need any more excuses. I need the truth." For a moment, Derek remained silent, his gaze shifting to the woman in the booth who had remained seated, watching the scene unfold. It was a moment of pure vulnerability, one that neither of them had been prepared for. Derek, who had always been in control, was now the one caught off guard, his world crumbling around him. The woman stood up, walking toward them with a quiet confidence. She looked at Jessica, her expression unreadable. "I think it's time we all talked," she said coolly, her voice laced with a hint of challenge. But the woman didn't back down. She looked at Jessica with a knowing glance. "You think you know everything, but you don't," she said cryptically. "There's more to the story than you think." Jessica's heart pounded in her chest, her mind swirling with questions. What was this woman trying to say? And why was she so calm, so confident, in the face of everything? Before she could respond, Derek spoke up, his voice low and weary. "Jess, please. Let's just go home and talk. We can figure this out." But Jessica had already made her decision. This was no longer about Derek or the woman. It was about her. It was about reclaiming control over her own life. "No, Derek," she said firmly, turning to face him. "I've had enough of the lies. I've had enough of being kept in the dark. This ends now." Without another word, she turned and walked out of the cafe, her mind clearer than it had ever been. The storm had broken and the truth was out. There was no going back. Jessica stepped outside the cafe, her heart pounding in her chest, the weight of everything crashing down on her all at once. The sun was bright, too bright for a day that had been filled with so much raw emotion. She walked quickly, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement, but her mind was clouded, her thoughts swirling like a tornado. She couldn't believe she had just confronted Derek, and, even more, she couldn't believe how calm he had been about it. There was no desperation in his voice, no apology in his eyes, just a cold indifference. And the woman, his mistress, had spoken with such certainty, as if she were the one in control of the situation. It felt like Jessica was the one who had lost control, like the world around her had shifted into something unrecognizable. Jessica's hands were trembling, and she clenched them into fists, trying to steady herself. She needed space, a moment to think. Her car was parked a block away, but instead of heading straight for it, she walked aimlessly, trying to clear her head. Her thoughts raced as she replayed the scene in the cafe over and over, each time seeing something different. The look in Derek's eyes, the way his mistress spoke, the strange feeling in the pit of her stomach, it was all too much. She made her way to a nearby park, the familiar sound of children playing and people jogging past her doing little to calm her nerves. She found an empty bench near the edge of a small pond and sat down, burying her face in her hands. For the first time in weeks, tears filled her eyes. The anger and hurt she had been holding back for so long finally broke free, and she let herself cry, harder than she had ever allowed herself to before. What had happened to her? What had happened to the woman who used to be full of hope, full of love? Somewhere along the way, Jessica had lost herself. She had allowed Derek's lies, his betrayal, and his indifference to chip away at her self-worth, until she was just a shadow of the person she once was. And now, standing here in the aftermath, she felt completely shattered. She pulled her phone out of her purse and stared at it for a moment. Her fingers hovered over the screen as she debated whether or not to call anyone. But who would she call? Her best friend, Natalie, had been supportive, but what would she say? Would she offer sympathy, or would she be angry with her for letting this go on for so long? The truth was, Jessica had no idea who she could turn to anymore. Derek had isolated her from her friends, from her family, over the years, making her feel like there was only him. But now she saw how deeply he had manipulated her. As the tears continued to fall, Jessica's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and saw a message from Derek. She didn't even need to read it to know what it would say. It was probably another one of his half-hearted attempts at a defense, some explanation that would try to ease his guilt and make everything go back to normal. She clicked on the message, the words almost too painful to read. "We need to talk. Come home." The words were hollow, empty. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what he had done. It was as if he expected everything to just fall back into place once he made his request. But Jessica couldn't be fooled anymore. She had seen the truth, and there was no going back. A part of her still longed to return home, to have everything be okay again, to pretend like nothing had changed. But deep down, she knew that was impossible. Something had broken beyond repair. There was no more pretending. There was no more going back. Suddenly, she felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her. The emotional impact of everything she had seen, everything she had learned, hit her like a freight train. Her stomach churned, and her chest tightened with a mixture of heartbreak and anger. She loved Derek once. She had loved him with everything she had. But now, love felt like a distant memory, replaced by a deep sense of betrayal. The pain in her chest was almost unbearable, and she couldn't keep it inside anymore. Her phone buzzed again, but this time, it was a call. She didn't recognize the number, but she answered it anyway, too tired to care. "Jessica?" A voice said on the other end. It was a woman's voice, calm but firm. "This is Chloe." Chloe, the woman from the cafe. Jessica's heart skipped a beat, and she instinctively tightened her grip on the phone. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice hoarse, not caring if she sounded harsh. "I think we need to talk," Chloe said. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But there are things you don't know. Things Derek hasn't told you. And maybe it's time you heard the whole story." Jessica felt a flicker of something inside her, curiosity, or maybe just desperation. She didn't know what Chloe could possibly say that would make any of this better, but she couldn't deny that something about her calm, measured voice was pulling her in. "I'm listening," Jessica said, her tone flat, guarded. She didn't know if she was ready for what Chloe had to say, but she knew one thing. She couldn't keep living in the dark. "I think it's best if we meet in person," Chloe replied. "I won't keep you long, but you deserve to know everything. The truth, Jessica. Not just from Derek, but from me. There was silence on the line for a moment, and Jessica's mind raced. Should she meet with Chloe? What could she possibly learn that would make a difference? Would it help her understand why Derek had done this to her, or would it only make things worse? But in that moment, Jessica realized that she needed to hear the truth. She needed to hear it from someone who wasn't trying to protect Derek, someone who wasn't wrapped up in the lies. Okay, Jessica said, the word coming out softer than she expected. Where? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The decision to meet Chloe wasn't an easy one, but Jessica knew she had to face whatever was coming. After hanging up the phone, she sat on the park bench for a few more minutes, her thoughts swirling like a storm. She had no idea what Chloe wanted to tell her, but something told her that the truth, no matter how painful, was the only thing that could set her free. As she walked back to her car, the weight of her decision settled over her. The anger and heartbreak that had been bubbling inside her now seemed to have shifted, replaced by a sense of quiet resolve. She knew this meeting wouldn't solve everything, but it would bring clarity. And for Jessica, clarity was the first step toward moving forward. She drove to the address Chloe had given her, a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. The place was quiet, nestled between old brick buildings, with only a handful of cars in the parking lot. It felt strange to be there, like she was stepping into a new chapter of her life, one that was both uncertain and terrifying. As Jessica entered the cafe, she spotted Chloe immediately. The woman was sitting at a table in the corner, her posture confident, but her eyes seemed to soften when she saw Jessica approach. Chloe stood up to greet her, offering a polite but hesitant smile. "Thanks for meeting me," Chloe said, her voice calm, almost soothing. "I know this isn't easy for you." Jessica nodded but didn't say anything. Her eyes scanned Chloe's face, looking for any sign of deception, any hint that this was all part of another lie. But all she saw was sincerity. It was confusing. Part of her wanted to hate this woman, wanted to believe she was the enemy, but another part of her was curious. What could Chloe possibly have to say that would make any of this make sense? Chloe gestured for Jessica to sit. "Please," she said. "I'm not here to fight with you. I need you to hear the truth. I owe you that." Jessica sat down, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. She wasn't sure if she was ready to hear whatever Chloe was about to say, but she couldn't back out now. There was no going back from where she stood. Not anymore. "I know what you must think," Chloe started, her voice steady. "But I wasn't the one who sought Derek out. He came to me." Jessica's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "Derek, he told me everything was fine. That everything between us was good." Chloe sighed softly, her gaze falling to the table before meeting Jessica's eyes again. "Derek has a way of making people believe what he wants them to believe. But the truth is, he was miserable. And not in the way he let you think. He wasn't just unhappy with you, he was running from himself. From his own guilt, from his own fears." Jessica felt a lump form in her throat. "And you were the one he ran to?" she asked, her voice almost trembling. The words felt like a betrayal, but at the same time, she couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for Chloe. She wasn't the villain in this story, at least not the way Jessica had imagined. Chloe nodded slowly. "I didn't know about you at first. But then, he started talking about you, about how he felt trapped, how he couldn't live up to the image you had of him. How he couldn't admit to himself that he was losing control, losing you. And when I realized what was happening, I was already too far in." Jessica's heart was heavy, the weight of Chloe's words sinking in. She had always thought of the affair as a simple case of betrayal, a straightforward black and white situation. But now it seemed so much more complicated. There was pain on both sides, pain she hadn't expected to hear about. "Why are you telling me this?" Jessica asked quietly. "What do you want me to do with this information?" Chloe hesitated for a moment, then leaned forward, her voice softening. "I'm not asking you to forgive him. Or me. I'm not even asking you to stay with him. But I need you to know that Derek didn't fall into this relationship because he wanted to hurt you. He was trying to escape something inside himself, something he never told you about. Jessica's mind was spinning. She had always believed that Derek's betrayal was about her, about his lack of love or respect for her. But now, Chloe was telling her that there was more to it, a deeper issue that had been festering beneath the surface for years. Was it possible that Derek wasn't just being selfish? That he had been dealing with his own demons that Jessica had never seen? I don't know if I can forgive him, Jessica said, the words feeling like they were being ripped from her chest. I don't even know if I want to. Chloe's eyes softened with understanding. I don't expect you to, but I think you deserve to know the truth. Not just about him, but about yourself, too. Jessica frowned, confused. What do you mean? Chloe took a deep breath. I can't change what happened. But I can tell you this. You are stronger than you think. I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you've been living in the shadow of someone else's choices for too long. It's time for you to take control of your own story. The words hit Jessica harder than she expected. She hadn't realized how much she had been letting Derek define her life, her happiness, her self-worth. She had spent years trying to fix something that was beyond fixing, trying to make a broken marriage work because she couldn't let go of the dream of what it could have been. But now, looking at Chloe, at the woman who had been part of the chaos, Jessica saw a new truth. She had been living for Derek, for the life they once shared, and she had let her own identity slip away in the process. I don't know what comes next, Jessica said, her voice quiet, almost a whisper. But I do know that I can't keep living in the past. I need to let go. Chloe smiled softly, giving her a nod of understanding. That's the first step. Letting go. Jessica stood up, the weight of her decision beginning to settle in her bones. Thank you, she said, her voice steady, more sure of herself than she had been in weeks. Thank you for telling me the truth. Chloe nodded, her eyes holding a mix of sadness and relief. I hope you find peace, Jessica. I really do. As Jessica walked out of the cafe and into the bright sunlight, something inside her shifted. The world still felt uncertain, still felt raw, but she felt a small spark of hope. The future was hers to shape now. The road ahead wasn't easy, but for the first time in a long while, Jessica felt like she could breathe again. The sun was beginning to set as Jessica drove home, her mind buzzing with the weight of everything she had learned that day. The conversation with Chloe hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. For the first time in months, Jessica felt a glimmer of clarity. The truth, as painful as it was, had freed her in a way she hadn't expected. As she parked her car in the driveway, she took a deep breath. The house that had once felt like a safe haven now seemed foreign, like a place she no longer belonged. Derek hadn't contacted her again after their last exchange, and she didn't know if she was ready to face him. She had never imagined that their marriage would end like this, with her standing on the precipice of something new and unknown. The house loomed before her, its warm lights spilling out through the windows, mocking her sense of unease. She had spent so many years making it a home, decorating it, investing in it, pouring herself into it. But now it felt like nothing more than a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. With one last glance at the house, she took a deep breath and turned away, making her way into the small garden in the back. She didn't want to face Derek, not yet. Not when she was still trying to process everything that had happened. Sitting down on the stone bench beneath the old oak tree, Jessica let her mind wander. Her fingers traced the smooth surface of the stone, grounding her as the cool evening air washed over her. It felt good to be outside, to just sit and think, without the constant pressure of her emotions suffocating her. She thought about what Chloe had said, that Derek's affair wasn't just about Jessica, that it wasn't about her failing as a wife, or about her worth as a person. It was about Derek's inability to face his own demons. He had lied to himself for years, telling himself that he could escape his guilt, his fears, his disappointments, by running from them. But in the end, all he had done was hurt the person who had loved him the most. It wasn't her fault. It was never her fault. The realization hit her like a wave, and for the first time in a long time, Jessica felt something that she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years: relief. There was no shame in being betrayed. There was no shame in loving someone who wasn't capable of giving her what she needed. She had done her best, and that had to be enough. But the question remained, what now? She looked around at the familiar surroundings of the backyard, the garden where she and Derek used to spend quiet evenings together, the small pond they had built with so much hope. This place, once a symbol of their future, now seemed to mock her. She had spent so much time nurturing the dream of their perfect life together, but now it felt like that dream had been shattered beyond repair. But it wasn't over. It couldn't be. She stood up, wiping away the tears that had silently gathered on her cheeks. She wasn't going to let this define her. She wasn't going to let this heartbreak ruin her. Jessica knew she had more inside of her, more strength, more resilience, than she had ever given herself credit for. It was time to reclaim her life. The next morning, after a restless night of sleep, Jessica woke up with a sense of determination that she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't going to be a victim of her circumstances. She wasn't going to allow Derek's mistakes to control her. It was time to take the first steps toward rediscovering who she was. She called her best friend, Natalie, who had been there for her through thick and thin. The two had been inseparable since their college days, and Jessica knew that Natalie would understand, even if she couldn't explain everything right away. "Hey, Nat," Jessica said when her friend picked up the phone. "Can you meet me today? I need to talk." "Of course, Jess. Where are we meeting?" "The usual place," Jessica replied, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I think I need a little reminder of who I used to be." Natalie didn't ask any questions, she just agreed. They had always had a special connection, one that didn't require words to understand. Jessica knew that she could trust Natalie to be there for her, no matter what. A few hours later, the two women met at their favorite cafe, a small, cozy spot on the corner of a bustling street. It was the place where they had shared endless cups of coffee, where they had laughed, cried, and talked about their dreams. It had always been their sanctuary. Jessica sat down across from Natalie, who immediately reached for her hand. "I'm here, Jess. What's going on?" Jessica took a deep breath. She had been holding this in for so long that it felt like she was about to burst. She needed to let it all out, to finally stop pretending like everything was fine when it wasn't. "I found out about Derek," she said quietly, her voice shaky. "I confronted him and his mistress, Chloe, and I learned things I never knew. Things that hurt, but also made me see the truth about everything. About him, about me, about how I've been living for so long." Natalie's eyes softened with sympathy. "You've been through hell, Jess," she said gently. "But you're still standing. And that says more about you than anything Derek ever did." "I don't know who I am anymore, Nat," Jessica admitted, her voice trembling. "I've spent so many years trying to be what Derek needed me to be that I forgot who I really was. I lost myself in trying to fix a marriage that wasn't even broken in the way I thought." Natalie squeezed her hand tightly. "I know you've been through a lot, but you are not defined by Derek or this marriage. You are so much more than that. You have always been strong, Jess. It's time for you to remember that." Jessica looked at her friend, tears welling up in her eyes. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe again. It wasn't going to be easy, and the road ahead was uncertain, but she wasn't alone. She had people who loved her, who believed in her, and that gave her hope. "I'm scared, Nat," Jessica whispered. "I don't know where to go from here." Natalie smiled, her eyes filled with warmth. "One step at a time, Jess. That's all you need to focus on. We'll get through this together." As Jessica looked around the cafe, she realized something that had been hiding in the back of her mind. The life she had known was over, but a new chapter was just beginning. It was scary, but it was also exhilarating. She didn't have to stay stuck in the past anymore. The road to self-discovery was never easy, but Jessica was ready to take the first steps toward reclaiming her life and her happiness. The days that followed Jessica's heart-to-heart with Natalie felt like an emotional roller coaster. Some moments, she felt like she was walking on air, empowered by the truth and the support of her friends. But other moments, when the house felt too empty or the silence too loud, the weight of everything would settle back in. The pain was still there, but it was different now, more bearable somehow. She was learning to live with it. Her first steps in reclaiming her life weren't easy. It meant making difficult decisions, ones she'd put off for far too long. She had to face the reality of what her marriage had become and what it would never be again. And more than that, she had to face the fact that she had been living for someone else, allowing their choices to dictate her happiness. It had been 2 weeks since the meeting with Chloe, and Jessica knew it was time to make the next big decision. Derek hadn't tried to contact her since their last argument, and she had to admit that part of her was relieved. It gave her space to breathe. But now, the question loomed, what would she do about their home? Their life together? Could she even bear to stay in this house? She sat at the kitchen table, her fingers wrapped around a warm mug of coffee. The house felt eerily quiet this morning, almost like it was holding its breath. She hadn't spoken to Derek since the confrontation, and part of her had hoped he would return, apologize, and somehow make things right. But deep down, she knew that wasn't going to happen. He hadn't done the work to fix himself, to grow, to understand the damage he had caused. With a heavy sigh, she pulled out her phone and dialed the one person who had been her sounding board through all of this, her lawyer, Linda. It was time to take the next step. "Hello, Jessica," Linda answered cheerfully. "How are you holding up?" Jessica hesitated, trying to put her feelings into words. "Honestly, Linda, I'm doing better than I was. But I think it's time to talk about divorce. I need to know what the next steps are." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Jessica could almost feel Linda's nod of understanding. "I've been expecting you to call. It's not an easy decision, but I'll guide you through it. You don't have to go through this alone." A lump formed in Jessica's throat. She had put this off for so long, but now that the decision was made, it felt like a relief. A heavy weight was starting to lift from her shoulders. That afternoon, Jessica walked into the local divorce lawyer's office, a place she never imagined she would find herself. As she sat down in the sterile, beige waiting room, she felt a sense of finality settle over her. She was no longer the woman who had tried so desperately to hold onto a broken marriage. She was moving forward. She was taking control. When Linda came out to greet her, Jessica noticed how calm and professional she looked, but also how warm and empathetic she was. "Come on back, Jessica. Let's get started." The office was small but well kept, with a view of the city's skyline through the large windows. As they sat down at the conference table, Linda spread out a few papers in front of Jessica. "I know you've been through a lot. Divorce can be difficult, both emotionally and logistically, but I'm here to make sure you're supported every step of the way." Jessica nodded. She appreciated Linda's professionalism, but she was also grateful for her kindness. "I'm ready, Linda. I just want to move on." The lawyer smiled and began explaining the details, how to separate assets, what the timeline would look like, what to expect in terms of custody and alimony, if applicable. It felt strange, signing documents that would officially end her marriage, but at the same time, it was empowering. She wasn't making this decision out of bitterness or anger. She was making it because she needed to take control of her life again. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork, phone calls, and difficult conversations. Derek still hadn't reached out, and Jessica wasn't sure whether that was a blessing or a curse. It gave her the space she needed, but it also made the process feel so much more real. She was navigating uncharted territory, an unfamiliar future where her identity wasn't tied to being Derek's wife, where her purpose wasn't wrapped up in saving something that was already beyond repair. One evening, as Jessica was sorting through some old boxes in the attic, she came across a photo album from their early days together. The pictures were full of smiles, vacations, birthday parties, weddings, and holidays. It felt like a different lifetime. She had been so full of hope back then, so eager to believe in the future. But now all those smiles seemed like distant memories of a different person. She flipped through the pages slowly, allowing herself to feel the sadness. It was okay to mourn the loss of what she thought she had. It was okay to feel grief. But she couldn't stay there. She couldn't let herself get stuck in the past, trapped by the illusion of what could have been. As she reached the last few pages, her fingers paused over a picture of her and Derek on their wedding day. Her eyes lingered on the woman she had been back then, so young, so full of love. That woman had believed in forever. She had believed in fairy tales. But that belief had been shattered. It was time to let go of the past and make room for a new future. One where she wasn't just someone's wife or someone's partner, but a woman who could stand on her own 2 feet and create a life that was her own. Jessica's life began to change gradually. She threw herself into her work, picked up hobbies she had long since forgotten, and reconnected with friends she had pushed aside during the years of her marriage. There was a sense of freedom in the chaos of it all, as if she was shedding old skin and becoming someone new. She still had moments of doubt, moments when the loneliness crept in, but they were fewer and farther between. Her relationship with Natalie grew stronger as they spent more time together, laughing over brunches, watching movies, and reminiscing about their college days. She was starting to feel like herself again, like the woman she used to be before she had been defined by her relationship with Derek. And through it all, Jessica was learning something important. That life, though messy and unpredictable, was still hers to shape. She had the power to move forward, to find happiness, to redefine what her future looked like. She wasn't a victim of her circumstances. She was the creator of her own destiny. The weeks that followed Jessica's decision to move forward with the divorce felt like both an eternity and the blink of an eye. As much as she had dreaded the initial process of separating her life from Derek's, she was beginning to understand that the journey was not just about closing one chapter, it was about opening another. And despite the difficulty, there was a strange sense of relief that came with it. There were moments when doubt crept in, when she wondered if she was making a mistake, but each time that doubt surfaced, she reminded herself of the painful truth she had learned over the last few months. Derek wasn't the man she thought he was. And she wasn't the woman she used to be, either. She had spent so long trying to make their marriage work, so long trying to be everything Derek needed, that she had forgotten about herself. She had forgotten about the woman who loved to travel, who spent hours getting lost in books, who stayed up late with Natalie, talking about everything and nothing all at once. But now, she was finding herself again. And that process wasn't quick or easy, it was messy, full of setbacks and missteps. But with each day, she was healing. It had been a month since she filed for divorce, and Jessica was finally starting to feel like she could breathe again. The house, though still too quiet, no longer felt suffocating. She spent her weekends exploring new cafes, walking through parks, and reconnecting with old friends. She even took up yoga, something she'd always wanted to try but never had the time for. Each class brought a sense of calm she hadn't felt in years. One Saturday morning, Jessica sat in a small cafe with her laptop open in front of her, sipping a hot cappuccino. The city's bustle outside the window was a far cry from the silent tension that had hung in her home just weeks before. She was working on a freelance writing project she'd taken up, something that was entirely her own. It felt good to pour her creativity into something she had chosen for herself, and the work was fulfilling in a way she hadn't expected. As she typed, her phone buzzed on the table, breaking her concentration. She glanced at the screen, expecting to see a notification or an advertisement. But when she saw the name, her heart skipped a beat. Derek. Her thumb hovered over the message, hesitation clawing at her. It had been weeks since she'd heard from him, and the last time they spoke, it was heated, painful, full of accusations and defenses. She hadn't been sure what she would do if he reached out, but now that the moment had come, she wasn't sure how to handle it. Should I open it? What does he want? After a deep breath, she tapped the screen, opening the message. Derek, we need to talk. The words stung, but they also didn't surprise her. There was something about Derek's message that felt like an echo of a time when she used to want him to come back and fix things. But now? Now, she wasn't so sure. Talk? What for? Jessica sat back in her chair, thinking about it. She didn't feel the rush of anger that had once surged through her veins when she thought of Derek. Instead, she felt calm. The anger had long since faded, replaced with a quiet resolve. She responded with a simple message. Jessica, what exactly do you want to talk about? She waited, her fingers tapping anxiously on the edge of her cup. For a moment, she wondered if she had made a mistake by responding at all. She wasn't sure she was ready to open that door again. Not yet. The reply came a few minutes later, this time longer. Derek, I've been thinking a lot about everything. I know I messed up. I've been to therapy. I want to fix things, at least talk about it. I need closure, Jess. I need you to know I'm sorry for what I did. The words hung in the air between them. It wasn't an apology that Jessica had been waiting for. It wasn't even an apology that would fix anything. But there it was, his confession, his attempt to make amends. Her heart twisted as she read his message again. Part of her wanted to yell at him, wanted to tell him how much he had hurt her. But that part of her, the part that was still angry and broken, was quieter now. Closure, she thought. Is that what this is? She took a deep breath, her fingers moving to type a response. Jessica, Derek, I'm glad you're getting help. But I'm not ready to talk. I've come to terms with everything, and I think I need space to move on. I hope you understand. She stared at the message for a few moments, debating whether or not to send it. But in the end, she hit send and let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. For a long time, Jessica had hoped that Derek would come to his senses, that he would realize his mistakes and try to make things right. But she wasn't that person anymore, the woman who believed in second chances and waiting for things to get better. She had learned that she had to take control of her own healing. And that meant letting go, even when it hurt. Her phone buzzed again, but she didn't check it. Instead, she closed the laptop and pushed it aside. There was no need to dwell on the past anymore. She had moved on, and that was enough. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, Jessica went for a walk in the park. She had come to love these evening walks, time for herself, a chance to clear her head and center her thoughts. The sky was painted in shades of pink and gold, the air was crisp, and the leaves crunched beneath her feet. She felt a calmness wash over her, a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She paused by a small pond, watching the ducks swim lazily in the water. The world felt so big and full of possibility. She had spent so many years consumed by the idea of being someone's wife, someone's partner. But now, for the first time in a long time, she was just Jessica. Her thoughts turned to the future, what she wanted, who she wanted to be. She wasn't sure what lay ahead, but she wasn't afraid of it. She wasn't afraid of change anymore. She had learned that change didn't mean losing something. It meant gaining something new. It was the freedom to become the person she was always meant to be. The next morning, Jessica woke up with a newfound sense of purpose. She had a clear head and a quiet confidence. The divorce process was still ongoing, and there would be difficult moments ahead, but she was ready for whatever came next. It was time for her to build a life that was all her own, one that wasn't defined by her past, but by the strength and resilience she had found within herself. And as she looked out the window at the rising sun, Jessica knew that she had finally found her freedom. It had been 2 months since Jessica made the decision to end her marriage with Derek, and in that time, she had done more than just survive. She had started to live again. The weeks had passed in a blur of self-discovery, emotional healing, and small victories. But as life settled into its new rhythm, Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. Despite the progress, there were still moments of loneliness, times when the quiet in the house would overwhelm her, when she would remember the sound of Derek's laugh or the way he used to hold her late at night. It was during these moments that the weight of her decisions would come rushing back, and she would remind herself that she was better off alone than in a marriage built on lies and betrayal. But that night, when she came home from a particularly exhausting day at work, the unexpected happened. As Jessica unlocked the front door, a familiar chill ran down her spine. She had a strange feeling like she wasn't alone. Her heart raced for a moment, and she almost convinced herself it was nothing more than her imagination. But as she stepped into the hallway, her eyes froze. There, standing at the foot of the stairs, was Derek. His presence felt like a slap in the face. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. Jessica's mind screamed for her to run or shout at him, but she just stood there, frozen in place, trying to process what was happening. He looked just as he had the last time she saw him, tired, worn out, but with an expression on his face that made Jessica's chest tighten. "Derek, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain calm. He looked down, clearly uncomfortable. "I know I shouldn't have just shown up like this, Jess, but I had to see you. I've been thinking about everything, about us. I know I don't deserve this, but please, just hear me out." It wasn't that she still loved him. She had long since accepted that their marriage was broken beyond repair. It was more the shock of seeing him again, of hearing his voice, of confronting the reality of what had once been. That Friday evening, Jessica met Natalie for dinner at their favorite restaurant, a cozy little Italian place tucked away in the corner of a busy street. They shared a bottle of red wine, and as always, their conversation flowed effortlessly, from talk of work to travel plans and everything in between. But tonight, Jessica wasn't quite herself. She was quiet, lost in thought. "You okay?" Natalie asked, raising an eyebrow. "You've been a little off tonight." Jessica stared down at her glass, swirling the wine absent-mindedly. "Derek came by today." Natalie's eyebrows shot up. "What? Why?" Jessica sighed, pushing the glass away. "He wanted to talk. Apologize, I guess. He said he's been seeing a therapist, and he finally understands what he did wrong." Natalie's face softened. "And?" Jessica shrugged, feeling a mix of frustration and sadness. "I told him to leave. I told him I needed to let go, to heal, and he actually left. That's good, right?" Natalie's voice was gentle, but Jessica could hear the concern in it. "I don't know," she muttered. "It feels like it's not over, even though it is. I don't know if I'm making the right decisions." Natalie reached across the table, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. "You're doing the best you can. And no matter what, you're moving forward. That's all anyone can do, including him." Later that night, as Jessica returned to her apartment, she found herself staring out the window, lost in thought. Derek's unexpected visit had stirred up emotions she wasn't ready to face, and even though she had made it clear she wasn't going back, there was a part of her that wondered if his words had changed anything. But deep down, she knew what she had to do. She had made peace with the end of their marriage. She wasn't going to let him, or the past, define her anymore. It was time for Jessica to write her own story. And she was just getting started. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Jessica's apartment, casting soft golden streaks across the room. For the first time in a long while, Jessica felt a quiet peace settle within her. It wasn't a perfect peace, not one that erased the pain of the past or erased the memories of Derek and their failed marriage. But it was a peace that had taken root in her heart, a peace that had come from standing her ground, from choosing herself, and from letting go. Jessica had spent the past few months healing, rediscovering parts of herself she'd buried under the weight of her relationship with Derek. She had gone from feeling utterly lost, unsure of who she was outside of being his wife, to someone who was learning to embrace her own identity, someone who was starting to trust her own instincts and make decisions that were for her and her future. The divorce had been finalized a few weeks ago. The legal papers, the formalities, the endless meetings, it was all behind her now. But it still felt surreal. Derek's apology still lingered in her mind, but it no longer had the power to hold her back. She had spent so much of her life trying to fix things, fix her marriage, fix Derek, fix everything that was broken. But now she understood. Fixing everything wasn't her job. It was his responsibility to do the work on himself, and it was her responsibility to take care of her own heart, to make sure she didn't lose herself again. That morning, she decided to take a different route to work. A small part of her wanted to stay in the comfort of the usual, but a larger part of her longed for something new. It felt like a small but important step, one of many in reclaiming her autonomy. The streets were quieter than usual, the hustle of the city still a few hours away from reaching its peak. As Jessica walked, she passed by a small art gallery she hadn't noticed before. There was a sign out front that said, "Exhibit, Embracing Change." She paused, her fingers brushing the cool surface of the glass door. For a moment, she hesitated. Art had always been something she'd loved, but she had let it slip through the cracks when her life became consumed by the demands of marriage, of work, of everything else. Why not? She thought. Why not go in? With a deep breath, she stepped inside. The soft murmur of classical music greeted her, and the smell of fresh paint and wood filled her senses. The gallery was quiet, almost intimate, as if each piece of art was inviting her to stop, to look, and to truly see. The exhibit's theme resonated deeply with her, embracing change. Each painting, each sculpture, seemed to speak to a journey of transformation, a journey of shedding old skin and embracing something new. Jessica found herself drawn to one particular piece, a painting of a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, looking out at a vast, endless ocean. The sky was dark, filled with swirling clouds, yet there was a sliver of light breaking through. The woman seemed small in the face of the expansive world before her, yet there was something resolute in her stance. She wasn't afraid. She was ready for the unknown. The painting hit her like a wave, and Jessica felt tears well up in her eyes. It wasn't sadness, but something deeper, something that felt like release. She stepped closer, studying the brushstrokes, the emotion captured on the canvas. This is me, she thought. I am standing at the edge of something new, something unknown, but I am ready. A voice interrupted her reverie. It's a powerful piece, isn't it? A man said, standing next to her. He was tall, with salt and pepper hair and a kind smile. It's called The Edge of Possibility. Jessica smiled softly, wiping away a stray tear. It's beautiful. It speaks to me in a way I didn't expect. The man nodded, as if he understood exactly what she meant. Art has a way of doing that. It reflects where we are in our lives, where we've been, and where we're going. This piece, for example, it's about finding strength in the face of uncertainty. I think that's something we can all relate to, no matter where we are. Jessica glanced at him, her curiosity piqued. You're an artist? She asked. He shook his head, smiling again. No, just a lover of art. But I do appreciate its power. And sometimes I find that art helps us find the answers we're looking for. The conversation lingered for a moment longer, but eventually, Jessica thanked him and made her way out of the gallery. Her heart was full. She had discovered something she didn't even know she was searching for, a sense of closure, an understanding that her past did not define her. That she could embrace the future, no matter how uncertain, with strength and grace. That evening, As Jessica settled into her apartment, she felt a sense of anticipation. She had been so focused on healing, on making sure she was okay, that she hadn't allowed herself to consider what came next. But as she reflected on the day, on the painting, on the gallery, she realized something important. She was ready to move forward. She was ready to embrace the life she had worked so hard to rebuild. Not just as someone who had been hurt, but as someone who was capable of joy, of love, and of adventure. Jessica smiled at the thought. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. And the possibilities were endless. The next day, Jessica took another step toward this new chapter. She signed up for a photography class, something she had always wanted to do, but had never made time for. She had no idea where it would lead, or what she might discover about herself along the way, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of excitement, genuine excitement, for the future. Later that evening, she called Natalie to tell her about the class. Natalie was thrilled, as she always was whenever Jessica took a leap. "I'm so proud of you, Jess. You're doing it. You're not just healing, you're living." Jessica laughed, feeling a warmth in her chest. "Yeah, I think I'm finally starting to, and it feels good." As Jessica stood by the window that night, watching the city lights flicker to life, she knew she was on the verge of something beautiful. She had faced the darkness of her past, confronted the pain of betrayal, and come out on the other side stronger and more whole than she had ever thought possible. In the quiet of her apartment, she whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning." And for the first time in a long time, she was okay with not knowing exactly what came next. The future was hers to shape, and no one could take that from her. She was free. She was alive. And she was ready. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?